I'm going to start the next round of questioning, something for the two of you. A lot of people are talking about a food policy council in New York City. What do you think? What are the advantages and disadvantages of that? Any thoughts about a process to get to a food policy council? Let's have 3 or 4 or 5 more questions, and then we might be in our last round of responses. Yes?
I'm reading that in Health and Hospitals Corporation, there is now an ability of some physicians to write prescriptions for food. And it seems to me that is superb data. What is being done with the data? You have now a neutral population of people who are sick because they don't have food. If I were to look at metrics, I want to know, are they on food stamps? Are they not? If not, why? You know, do they make $1 more than, you know, eligibility? And then just as a troublemaker, I'm wondering why are we waiting for them to get sick in the hospital before we go find them and give them some food? But that's pie in the sky. But on the metrics issue, has there been any planning for that? I think that would be dynamite info.
Other questions, comments?
Hi, I'm Linda Laviolette from Empire State Development. I work with the State Food Policy Council. I just have 2 comments. One about jobs. I think that we really need to focus on the Immigration Act, because if you look around New York City, who are a majority of the workers in the food service sector, a lot of them are undocumented. So that goes really right back to social justice issues, and we can't leave them out of the discussion. And the second thing that I really didn't hear addressed is the food shed. And I mean, the food shed and the Hunts Point redevelopment is going to have a major impact on our access to local and local food. So that's something I think that we really need to pay a little attention to.
Susan.
My name's Susan Klitzman. I'm with the CUNY School of Public Health, and also for the past 12 years I've been a member of the New York City Board of Health. And I'm proud to say that in addition to many of the accomplishments that Kim mentioned, our board, I feel, has done many things to improve the food health and food quality in New York City, including the calorie labeling, the restaurant grading, and the trans fat ban. All of these things have been documented to show their success in terms of increasing awareness and increasing food safety. But one area that we weren't so successful in is restricting the size of sugary soft drinks.
Yet.
And a big reason why we weren't so successful is because there was major organizing and cash on the part of the beverage industry against this initiative. In addition, the organizers skillfully worked with many low-income communities. They worked with many city council people, and they gave the wrong message, an uneducated message. So I would say in the incoming administration, it's very important. We're very lucky that incoming Mayor de Blasio is a supporter of this and other similar initiatives. But I fear that we could do a lot of important work by educating our city council. And one of the reasons that this policy is hanging in the balance is over what is the role of the city council versus the role of the Board of Health on issues such as restricting the size of sugary beverages. So I think we have a lot of work to do to make sure that our incoming city council is really an educated food advocate in all the dimensions of food security, economic justice, and food justice that you are talking about today. So thank you.
In the back, yes, and then two in the back. Sorry to point.
Hi, my name is Ashley and I work with Grow NYC. I work with a lot of farmers around the state and in the region, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey. I also have a master's in policy from NYU, and whenever I meet with these farmers, I realize how little I actually know about agricultural policy, even though I proudly put that title on my little signature. So in terms of a food policy council, I really think that there needs to be representation from farmers. And there are some really, really, really skilled, articulate farmers in this region that know a ton about hydraulic fracturing and, gas and oil drilling and land rights and law and transportation and logistics and all these other issues. So I think it would really behoove us to have someone like that being informed on the council. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Caitlin, and Salemi. I wear a couple of different hats. And I think I'm going to make my comments with an individual hat on. Actually, no, I'll make one comment. One of the things that I do is help to coordinate this New York City Food Forum effort. And just a comment about Nick's question to Nancy earlier, which is how, what's the difference for the food movement in terms of coalescing around one issue or going for the whole enchilada, no pun intended. And I don't know, I think there's been a lot of discussion of the 60 groups that are participating in terms of not really wanting as a group to prioritize, right, what's included in that primer, but at the same time wanting to be strategic. So being able to possibly advance issues that, looking at, okay, well, what do we know about the incoming administration and what would be possible wins, and letting those sort of filter to the top as opposed to saying, well, these are the things that are most important to us. It's like, let's get some action under our belt and build up the trust among the coalition. And so it'll be an interesting process to see how that evolves the more specific it gets. But there's a lot of, what's been amazing about seeing all of the groups working together is there is this agreement to disagree on some things, or agreement to sort of find what there is agreement on. And while everybody's still sort of pushing for their own priorities and with their own voices. And I guess there's a slight follow-up question to that. I'm going to try to be quick, which is that sitting in an administration, how confusing is that to have some voice around a unified issue and then a lot of individual voices on some similar issues? And then the second thing, and this is as an individual, not speaking, I don't speak for the forum, but just on this topic of a food policy council, one question I have for the movement and for someone in the existing or coming out of the existing administration is just in the way that Kim was speaking to. It's important for us as advocates to know what's happening right inside. I would say, thinking forward in terms of creating a new institutional structure, it's important for our folks in local government to know what folks in advocacy are doing and how folks in advocacy are organizing themselves around food policy and food issues. And I'm curious, what can the relationship between a possible new institution, if it's a council or something else, and advocates be? Is there something savvy there to think about?
So one more hand up. Why don't we hear from one more person, and then we'll end with three of us saying a few things about these last round of comments and questions.
Hi, I'm Nadia Johnson with Just Food, and I just wanted to expand on Nick's question about Food Policy Council. And Kim, your thoughts on or guidance towards advocates as we engage with elected offices in city government was very useful. And I just wondered if you had some insight on these more pie-in-the-sky ideas that advocates have, like a food policy council or a Department of Food or Department of Markets, whether you support those infrastructures or not. What would your advice be for advocates who would like to push the new mayor to advance those goals? Thanks.
So, my gosh, there was so much there, and my notes are hard to navigate, but I have a couple of things. So one thing I think, is FitnessGram publicly available? Look at Maureen. No?
I don't think so.
Okay. But community health survey data is,
Yes.
so, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but it can be, you can do all sorts of data processing with what's available on the Department of Health website. And we also just did do an updated version of the Supermarket Needs Index, analyzing where we are on supermarket access in neighborhoods, and that is in the food metrics report. So just some follow-ups to Nick's points about making data available. I also want to just say one thing about the jobs conversation, which is, I think has come up to the fore in this conversation, which is just about framing. I think there's still some work to do around framing and jobs in the food discussion, because there's actually a tension between jobs and good jobs and certain food policy goals, in that, like, if it's the living wage unionized, like, hot dog, Chinese bubble tea stand, like, some people aren't going to be excited about it. And so there's just some definitional work to do still in talking about it. I think certainly the crux and the nexus is around living wages, because we know that that's kind of going upstream around so many food policy challenges, but there's so many pieces to what's being talked about. It's regional, it's living wage, it's micro businesses, it's food entrepreneurialism, and it's still fairly, I think there's still some just work to do around creating a mantra around, what is it, what are the goals that reflect not just economic development, but a food policy goal. Which I think is what you were saying, but I think it's really emerged in this conversation. I also want to thank Susan for her comments, because it's really, really true. One of the things that you didn't mention was the adoption of Article 47, which eliminated sugary drinks from daycare establishments and had other nutritional guidance, and we think really helped contribute to the reduction in childhood obesity in New York City. But so the Board of Health really has done some incredible things in New York City, and the comments about community mobilization. So if you want to see those kinds of aggressive policies around sugary drinks passed, the city would need help around community mobilization, and it again goes to the work part of the teamwork. So the question of the moment, food policy councils and how can advocates engage? I think that I also would I would like to answer questions about FERX after the food prescription program after, but in the interest of time. So first I do have thoughts about a Department of Food. I think that it's very important that, my view is very important that this functionality is in the mayor's office. And we are able to accomplish so much because we're in the mayor's office and we're able to reach across city agencies. I do not think that another city agency that has food as its agenda is going to work, because it's already so clear that so much food is happening. It is housed in DOE. It is housed, obviously, the health department and our social services agencies already just are doing so much to impact food. And when we literally work with parks, planning, EDC, NYCHA, health, which I mentioned already, and more, and many more. And so you're just not going to have one agency. If you have something that's, an agency, it's not going to be able to bring together partners the same way that an entity in City Hall is going to be able to do. And that agency would have to be humongous to do that work in terms of staffing and resources. So what's happening in food policy is really in our city agencies. It's done as part of our city agency work, and recreating that as a separate department I do not think would be as effective as working across all city agencies. In terms of Food Policy Council, I think the important thing is it going to help you do the things that we've talked about doing, which are prioritize, get work done, and bring expertise to the table. I do think it's very important that, I've heard it said by some advocates in the city, and I agree with this, that in New York City today, there really is a virtual food policy council. There really is, and the food forum, I guess, has somewhat crystallized that, but I think even prior to that, there really is a very strong, robust, ongoing dialogue, and people talking to each other, and people talking to city government very consistently. So I don't think that this is as much of a missing piece as is being talked about. So I think the point about formalizing a structure should be thought about in terms of, will it help you do this work? The role for city government in it, I think there's a challenge around having city government sit on a council that is also the audience of policy recommendations, that's not really appropriate for the city government. I mean, my view is that it's a challenging role for a city official to be on an entity that is creating recommendations for it to then accept. So there can be formalized participation and exchange, which is what I think we really do try and facilitate and have already today. In terms of the city government's role, in terms of engagement and exchange with advocates. When there was the the Food Policy Council was housed at United Way, we participated in that regularly. When there's other forums or opportunities to participate and share information about what the city is doing and learn from advocates, we participate in those events. So I think that those are the key questions to ask. And I think that there is certainly opportunity for information sharing and for goal setting, which I think is important, because when you have a couple, when you build your power through some wins, it will be, I think, a big gain for a movement around food. It's a little bit rambling, but hopefully helpful.
I just want to say a particular thank you to Kim. I'm taking copious notes because you're partly because you've left and you have this wonderful view of what happened and also what we all can do. I just want to say a special thank you. Find your
Very
input
happy to be here. Thank
really
you.
really helpful. We should probably pull you into the New York City Food Forum before you move to.
I'm not moving. I'm not
Oh.
moving. I'm give everyone my email too, so you can.
Okay, good.
yes.
Aha, watch out. You're not going to Los Angeles after all this winter weather? Okay, so I want to address first the question of the Food Policy Council. I think everything that you said, Kim, is very smart about, not having a Department of Food. I totally agree with that. I think one of the problems, though, that I see of not, you can never have enough advice, right? You need to have the voices of all the different organizations, all the different people who care about food, absolutely. So, and that's a very long list.
You never hear me disagree with that. Yeah.
It's a very, very long
Enough
list.
advice.
But there is an entity that has organized, the New York City Food Forum has begun to organize, and if we had a more formal role, we would be even better organized. We would engage more and more people because they would see this as a way of having an impact. So I do think it would be particularly good to figure out a way to include an entity like the New York City Food Forum in the Policy Council, Food Policy Council. There is a bill, that's going to be coming in. It's going to be put forward, I think, this week by Brad Lander. And so it's the Food Policy Council discussion there's going to be one, I think. And so the question is, who's in it? How are those people chosen? And all of that. And I totally agree about the importance of having farmers. I think that is, that is a missing link. In the United States, we have 1% to 2% of our population engaged in farming. In the rest of the world, it's 75–80%. We've gotten rid of all of our farmers, and it's at our peril. And we need to hear from the farmers. We also, I think Linda LaViolette's point about the food shed and Hunts Point redevelopment is absolutely central. I personally don't know enough to really speak intelligently about it, to add something to the conversation, but I do know that needs to be a great focus for the next mayor and for the Food Policy Council. How that develops is going to have a huge impact in our future. And then also want to say something about immigration. Almost all employers, we're all concerned about immigration. Almost all food sector employers have large portions of their workers as immigrants, and they would very much like, the better ones at least, the better employers, would like to see a pathway to citizenship, because they know it's very hard for the employer, it's very hard for the worker. So there are some things that the city can do. And it would be very good for us to, and I think de Blasio is open to doing what he can do, but also to push in terms of federal legislation on that, as adding to your list of what we could do to affect federal legislation. You know, we work with the Brooklyn Restaurant Roundtable with the Restaurant Opportunity Center, which is a restaurant worker organizing group. We're working with what they call the high road restaurateurs, restaurant owners who are good employers and also want to make a profit, and they surface the question of immigrant workers. You know, they have these great workers who they're sort of often protecting, and it's just a bad setup for the workers. They don't have rights, and they need to have those rights.
I guess my thoughts about a food policy council, I've recently had some conversations with West Coast colleagues in cities where there are food policy councils, and heard a lot of cautions about the food policy council becoming a somewhat static vehicle where fights happen or disputes happen instead of action. And I think if we decide to go forward with this, we need to figure out how not to have that happen. How can we make it be a forum and a catalyst for action rather than a place where people come as a substitute for action? And especially if it's a large council with a wide cross-section of the stakeholders, including the food industry and others that have very divergent interests, it might not achieve what we intend. And I guess, and I also wanted to thank you, Kim, for the work you've given to the people of New York City for all these years. But I think if there's a common criticism of the larger Bloomberg administration, it's been not enough two-way communication, not enough building constituencies that can support the measures that are enacted, not enough mobilizing communities and listening to what communities want. And there are, of course, many exceptions to that. But I think we've seen that in a lot of different areas. And some of the lack of success on the initiatives comes from not having done enough work to mobilize communities in support of initiatives that will inevitably arouse opposition from special interests. And I think the solution to New York's food problems is more democracy, more participation, more engagement, more focus on equity. And so when I think about a food policy council, how can we make it that? How can we use this as a platform for increasing participation at the community level, at the city level? How can we use it to engage with others in the state and really beyond the state, in the region, because New York City's food shed, certainly spreads around the world. So how can we create a food policy council that is manageable and doable, but also that creates opportunities for taking on some of these bigger issues? And then I just wanted to, for people who came in late, remind you we'll be doing this Food Policy for Breakfast in 2014. We welcome your suggestions for topics. Some of the things we're thinking about are a little more focused on global issues. What can New York City learn from other cities and other parts of the world? And we're also maybe in this local perspective, thinking of looking in a little more depth at particular communities. We're spending a lot of time in the next year focusing on East Harlem, and maybe we would look in depth at one community and invite other people to look at in depth at others. So any other thoughts you have, and we'll use those to plan our schedule for the year. Thank you all so much for coming on a snowy day. And thank you to our speakers.
Thank you for organizing this.